What would you say to people who deny climate change is an issue? Now, there's probably someone online who holds one extreme spectrum, the other, and someone who holds the other. Even in the room, even with the small amount of people we have here, it might be that there's people in that different view. How do you think about this particular topic?
Let's just say here that I think one of the assumptions in the question is there aren't as many people who deny climate change as cycles in history, the past, and the differences that there have been over history and will be in the future. We believe that climates change. The real heart of the question is in man-made climate change. I think that's the controversial part of that. So I think most everybody says, yeah, there are seasons and cycles and weather events, and that is a change that I would say most people agree on. The man-made part of that is a more difficult element, but let me say this as we're looking at that, is that I think one of the things is that, so these are projections based off of climate models. And actually, if you check the weather, you're living based off of a climate model in some ways. You're looking at a model, and those are different because they can be repeated in some sense, but it's fascinating to me to look at. I like looking at different weather reports, recognizing that for most geographic regions, the weather stations are all using the same radar data. It's not like they're gathering different data. They're all using the same data and then running that through their different algorithms to produce their forecasts. And some of them are like 1/2 inch of snow and 2 feet of snow. Like, well, that's fascinating, using the same information to get to those wildly different conclusions. And I think the people who are skeptical there's a little bit of rightfulness in that, because I've found that the ones that have the craziest predictions have the most advertisements in the margins. So you're like, is it to your benefit to have a wild and crazy weather report because more people are going to click on this page? And so there's a little bit of not just skepticism in that, and then the other one that, so I'm not justifying it, but I'm trying to look for kind of causative threads and thoughts here. The other one is that actually there's a massive decline, this is going to sound weird to say, in science itself. Like if you look at our generation, the level of interest in astrology, for telling the future, of crystals, like all of these things are massively on the rise compared to our parents' generation. And so what science says in some categories isn't really taken seriously in a lot of categories, not just in this one. So I think there is one other thing to add on to this is to recognize that science doesn't, and this is more of a philosophy of science thing, science doesn't necessarily progress in a nice, neat, linear, step-by-step process. It kind of grows as an amorphous blob in the center of mass, sort of charts a trajectory of where we're thinking things are going. Even with your different weather forecasts based off of the same data, you can get a consensus of the direction that we think the thing is moving. So we can get a consensus of the direction that we think the thing is moving. This becomes a question of causation and correlation. I read the full IPCC, it's a massive report on this. I read the Oxford Introduction to Global Warming. And yeah, there are questions about how the things are put together and how samples are taken and how can they be accurate and all this. But there is a model that says, look, I don't think there's at the fundamental core of the science, I don't think there's a clickbait scheme going on here. Now, the way that scientific findings are then reported by non-scientists and communicated to scientists is where you get into like airport billboard size font in the headlines of the news. And so my suggestion when dealing with this is, when you see a claim in the news or a report, always click the link and read the report and what it actually said from the beginning. And sometimes I think we say a little bit more than our data can say, and we want to be careful not to do that as scientists, and we want to be careful not to do that as Christians either, but to look at the trajectory of these things and say, are there thoughtful Christian people even who are engaging with this, who say, hey, here's a trajectory of a way that we're headed, that aren't doing it in a politically manipulative, sociologically hip, but just for the sake of what the science says. And there have been very unfortunate things, I think, in the way that some of the data has been shared and not shared, and some of the lawsuits internally. And there's a lot of chaos and maybe over defensiveness in some of the voices that are speaking into this that blurs the lines and distinction there a little bit. So I think those would be some fundamental parameters. You're probably not going to So the question is, what would you say to somebody? We're not nearly as rational as we like to think we are. And so if somebody has a position on this, raw data probably isn't going to be the thing that changes their mind. And so I think you maintain your friendship. You continue to watch the conversation unfold. You take the actions that you think are appropriate to your interpretation of it. Again, not living in a existential fear of it, but being mindful of the trajectory of some of these things. And some of it is, we'll wait and see. And sometimes there are things that are unknown that you say, even if it doesn't turn out to be true, it would be bad enough that it's worth taking precautions now to not be complicit or a part of that. So people will come at different points on that.